Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being on this call, and thank you, Lisa Scroggs. And in the back, Stuart Smith, who is going to be a new assistant to all the departments at DESE. So Lisa, I'll let you introduce him a bit more if you'd like to in a moment. But today's call, Lisa has graciously offered her time to just come and give some of the most recent updates for ELA content meetings. So we're going to let her start off the meeting, and then at the end, anyone on the call, feel free throughout the call to put your questions in chat, and I'll try to monitor that. And then at the end of the call, we'll open it up for anyone to ask questions. So with that, Lisa, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Shauna. And I will go ahead. Thank you for introducing Stuart, who's here in my office joining in on the call today. He's our new Assistant Director of Curriculum here at DESE. He has an ELA background, but he will be assisting with all of our content areas. And what we're really excited about is he's bringing this ELA background in because we all know the importance of literacy in all of the content areas, and he will be able to help us with that work content area wide. So Stuart, welcome. Good to have you. All right, I want to go ahead and I have 4 things on my list for updates, and then I'll entertain any and all questions that anyone might have. The first thing has to do with priority standards and assessment. And there have been a number of questions that have come up regarding, thank you. There have been a number of questions that have come up regarding, hang on just a moment. Stuart, if we can close the door, please. Sorry about that, everyone. There have been questions coming up about the priority standards and the assessment. Are all of the assessment questions now priority standards? At the current time, 80 to 90% of the items on the state assessment are aligned with the priority standards. The rest are the supporting standards. And there have been rumors going around that we're going to see 100% of the items aligned to the priority standards. We're in a bit of a conundrum right now with that because of 2 laws. One is our state law. It was House Bill 1490 that passed back, and I think it was 2014, and that was what established the Missouri Learning Standards. That's when we made the shift from Common Core to Missouri Learning Standards. That law says that the Missouri Learning Standards may not be altered in any way without reconvening the work groups that originally came together to write these standards. And I do not see those groups coming back together to do that. So what we have right now is the Missouri Learning Standards. Those are our state standards, even though we have a subset of priority standards. Federal law, which mandates that we have state assessments. Federal law says that we are required to assess the depth and breadth of our state standards. Our state standards, as I said, because of state law, are the Missouri Learning Standards. Priority standards are just a subset of that. So that is why at this time, we cannot definitively say that 100% of the assessments will be aligned to the priority standards. So I just kind of wanted to clear that up because I know that has been a question that's been going on around the state. I guess any questions on that at this point while we're talking priority standards?
No, I appreciate that clarity, Lisa, because that has been at one point, I believe we heard by 2024, 100% of the assessment, but then that discrepancy with the state and federal law. And so when you're talking about that, that's not just an ELA thing, that goes with all 4 contents.
That is all content areas because of those state federal laws. Yes. Yeah. Another thing, and you mentioned by 2024, let me explain what's going on there. We are in the process of an assessment system redesign here at DESE. What we're wanting to do is provide a better way of assessing students. And this assessment redesign will be fully implemented by the 2024-25 school year. So when you hear 2024, that does not mean spring of 2024. It will be fall of 2024 on into the the 2025 school year where these will be fully implemented. So I know that's been some confusion going on in the state as to what 2024 actually means. This assessment redesign, and this is something I want to put out there for your network. You know, I am open to any and all ideas that people might have as to how we could create a better assessment system. And so when we're talking about system, we don't just mean that end of year summative assessment. What can we at DESE do along the way to help our educators better inform their instruction? Would that mean some interim assessment going on throughout the year? Would that mean more resources available to teachers? I know, for example, with ELA, one of the things that I am looking at as far as the summative assessment goes, changing that, would be with the writing prompt. And instead of a student just being given, this is your writing prompt, you will write to this prompt, providing choices, maybe providing 3 different topics from which a student may choose. And then once the student selects the topic, then would click into that and have a few resources available. And they would be different types of resources instead of just reading passages to go with that prompt. There might be a short informational piece, an infographic, and an audio clip. And so that way the student is pulling material from different types of resources into a piece of writing. It's also a great way to merge the different domains from ELA, the reading, the writing, the speaking, and listening. And so anyone who lives in ELA world knows how just naturally those domains merge together. So it makes sense to put that into a summative assessment. So as I said, I'm open to ideas. I did put my email address in the chat. So, you know, as ideas come up, you know, please send those my way so that I can talk with the folks here at assessment and see what's possible, what we can do to make assessment better. Any questions right now pertaining to the assessment redesign? Okay, I'm going to go on to the next one, and that has to do with assessment development projects. All of our items are written and reviewed by Missouri educators that appear on the test. And so we bring in hundreds of, I'm sorry, we have a question for Natalie. Are we still looking at ELA and math for 3 to 5? At this time, yeah, that's federal law. So, right. And of course, science for 5th. The science, I'm not familiar exactly with how the federal law is worded on that. So I wouldn't be the one to answer the science question. Sean Bates, I'll put his email address in the chat. He is our assessment coordinator here, and he can answer the science question for you. Okay, so back to the assessment development projects. We bring in hundreds of educators from all around the state. We need a mix of rural, urban, suburban. We have 9 designated regions in the state of Missouri. So we want to make sure that we bring in educators from all of those regions. So, you know, if any of the teachers in your network or educators, you know, we even administrators want to be involved in assessment development work, email me, let me know regarding ELA, and then there are other content areas you can be involved in as well. You know, the roster that we have used for several years, a lot of the people who are on it have, you know, changed locations in recent years. We've lost contact with them. Many have retired. And so we're putting together a brand new roster. So even if you were on our old roster, you're not coming on to the new one unless I hear from you. And I did send out emails to everybody on the old roster to let them know that if they're interested in remaining on the roster to be considered for projects, they need to let me know. Several of those emails bounced back with the message indicating that they were no longer in those districts. Okay, not that we had the wrong email, but no longer in those districts. So a lot of people I'm not going to be able to find. But anyway, if you're interested in those projects, give me an email so that I can get you on the roster. Any questions about the assessment development projects?
No, except I'll plug that anybody on the call and who watches this later who hasn't been involved in that, that's a really invaluable experience. And even if people who are watching the call don't directly want to be on it, if they know teachers who would be interested, I just want to echo that that's a great opportunity for teachers to be involved.
Thank you. Yeah, we get a lot of positive feedback from the educators who serve on these teams, and they do receive stipends for their work. So it is paid work that they do, and they're in person. We had gone virtual here for a bit, but we're moving back to in person. Our next round of projects will be in June, when we will be doing item writing for the ELA grades 3 through A, and then also for the end of course exams for English 1 and English 2. Okay, the last thing I have on my list of things to bring up, list of updates, is that we had been using an Edmodo group to get out information to ELA people. And we are scrapping the Edmodo. We've started having some trouble with it. And we had gone to Edmodo because we just were not, it was not possible for us to set up any other platforms because of OA regulations here on the state. So I finally, I guess I poked at enough people and got permission to set up an ELA listserv through DESE. So I have the link to that in the chat. I will put it in one more time so that it's there. And I strongly encourage you, if you're wanting information on all things ELA and or library, because I also do this for librarians, please sign up for this listserv. It's in its infancy, and it should be up and running full force sometime during the month of January. That's all I've got for updates. Any other pressing issues out there that you have questions about?
Okay, so this is a time if anybody on the call would like to ask, please unmute. I'll start with one while we're waiting. So one of the biggest takeaways I picked up on was just this idea of redesigning the assessment for 2024-25. And so one of the things I'll put on my network too is if people have ideas on what that could look like. So one of the things, I picked up on you saying not just even the assessment, but we're even thinking outside the box of maybe it's just not a summative. Would it be helpful for interim? Were you regarding to that if the state provided some type of interim or resources, that would be something that teachers could utilize to help support their kids along the way, but that the summative assessment would still be the ultimate data point? Does that make sense? Or would there be outside the box thinking where along the way we could be submitting core data for students so that it might be a bit more fair for a child who, for lack of a better word, chokes on the summative assessment, that we could be sending these data points along the way to show Johnny is growing?
Right. So here's what we've been talking about. And remember, these are just in the idea stage. So don't go running back to your district and saying, DESE said we're definitely doing this, because we're not to that point yet. Something that has come up in the discussion was to have, like you were suggesting, these data points along the way that could all come together in one final summative score to meet that federal requirement that we have for testing. Something like that could work well, for example, in science, where you have different, for lack of a better word, topics in science that honestly could be taught at any time during the year and assessed at any time during the year. You have the same going on in math. ELA is a different beast. I was talking earlier about merging the different domains together because your reading, writing, speaking, listening all come together. If we look at the Missouri Learning Standards for ELA, and I will use English 2 as an example because that was my background. When a student comes into my sophomore English class, I do not just do reading first quarter, writing second quarter, speaking third quarter, and listening fourth quarter. That's not how ELA works. And so, with that in mind, we couldn't just do a reading test first quarter, writing second quarter, and so on, because, for example, I would not expect my sophomores halfway through the school year to have truly mastered all of those writing skills that we need that entire year to develop. Same thing with reading, speaking, and listening. So, in that respect, what I foresee happening is that ELA, in order to meet the federal requirement, would have that one true summative at the end of the school year, simply because ELA is that type of beast. What we have spirals throughout the year. It's not separate chunks or topics of skills along the way. However, throughout the year, we could provide some interim, and it would not be for accountability for the district. It would not be that federal accountability, but just an opportunity for teachers to get a feel for how students are doing. What we want to be really careful about is to make sure that if we are putting assessments out there over a period of time, multiple assessments, that we are not sacrificing classroom instructional time for test prep time. We are so worried that that's going to happen. And this comes back to something you said, Sean, about the student who chokes on that summative at the end. Yes, the truth is that these assessments are for accountability, because at the federal level, they put requirements on the state, pressure on the state, who then puts pressure on the districts, who then puts pressure on the schools, puts pressure on the teachers, who then put pressure on the kids. And that's just a reality of the system that we have in place right now. But as educators, what we need to keep in mind is that if Johnny has a bad day on test day, he's probably going to choke on it, and that score is not going to be reflective of what Johnny can actually do. And it's up to the district to work with the students and the parents to help them understand that that one final state test score does not necessarily reflect all that that student is capable of doing. So, you know, it's an unfortunate situation that we have. But please, we ask that districts make sure that, and reassure students and parents that there's much more to determining what a child is able to do than that state test.
Well, and Lisa, just to piggyback on some of your things that you mentioned, I think that it is a big fear that we tend to overassess anyway, because of the pressure of accountability. And this is another plug, and I was trying to find the link really quickly, and I will in a moment. But I think one of the biggest things that I see when I work with teachers is just because ELA is exactly what you described. It's not this clear-cut beast, and the standards keep developing over time. So you can't really do those assessments earlier. It has to be more of an end of the year benchmark. But I think one of the trickiest things that is not as much of an issue in math and science is mastery is pretty clear cut and black and white. And in ELA, proficiency of a summary or proficiency of a main idea. So I love this idea of providing teachers, if we can get the message across, you don't have to assess all of these, but it helps give clarity to teachers that when we say a student should be able to use cause and effect, and here are some specific examples of what that might look like, because that's where I see the biggest discrepancy in the different resources people use, and just this misinterpretation of what does it look like to truly be proficient on that standard. And so one plug I'll give, and then I'll find the link, are your MoBlock resources beyond the released assessments you have, even some of the MoBlock on your MoBlock website, that you have those released assessments. I've used those a lot with teachers, because I think in ELA, it just helps provide another sense of clarity of what does it look like, sound like for a student to be proficient, and what are the things they need to be able to do, so that teachers can backward design along the way. And maybe that's something your interim could just serve as does my instruction align with the tasks of which they're
Yes.
asking my kids to do.
Yes, and that's, I see Natalie has a question in the chat, an estimate on how long the interims might take. Natalie, could you clarify that? Do you mean, for example, if a student were to sit down with that student, spend 30 minutes, an hour? Is that what you're
Sure.
asking the question?
Yeah, so if we go to these interim assessments, I was just getting ready to type. Our executive committee for the Missouri Association of Elementary Principals met with Margie in the fall, and we discussed the interim assessment to a degree. And several of us shared that, for example, my building has committed to iReady this year. And of course, that meets ELA and math. And there was just question if any of those assessments would count if there was a measure taken, okay, or if there would be reimbursement possibilities. I just know for us that benchmark has taken much longer than I anticipated. And I apologize, I don't have my camera on because I have a student in my office, so I know that's odd. But nonetheless, weeks, not days, weeks to complete this benchmark. And so I know the teacher's heart is, I want to teach, I don't want to assess.
Right.
So my worry would be, do we have an estimated time? Are we looking at 2 45-minute to 60-minute sessions for math? And you know what I mean? Similar to what we maybe look at in the springtime, or even shorter.
Right, and I can't answer for the other content areas. For ELA, it would not be as lengthy as that summative assessment would be. It would be a smaller piece. For example, when we look at the writing standards, moving from grade 8 to grade 9, by the end of grade 8, a student has to be able to write a narrative, be able to write an informative piece, and be able to write an argumentative piece. Starting in 9th grade, the students have to learn how to blend these genres into a single piece of writing. So one possible interim that we might do early on in English 1 would be to have a student write a narrative paragraph, or perhaps write an informational paragraph, or perhaps write a couple of argumentative paragraphs, just some short pieces to give the teacher an idea of where the student is on understanding how to write that genre of writing, and then helping inform the teacher what would be a good entry point for that student or those students to begin working on blending genres into a piece of writing. Then perhaps later on in the year, after students have had an opportunity, say, to learn how to incorporate narrative into an informational piece, then do a longer piece of writing, which teachers should be doing in the classroom anyway, with that writing. So to come back and answer your question, I do not see with ELA interims that would last that full 90 minutes or whatever they are spending. That would be reserved for that summative at the end. Other content areas, I know there's been some talk, if you can, for example, divide your science up into those different topics throughout the year, then of course they would each be shorter than that one long summative at the end. But beyond that, I don't know what details they're working out on it.
I guess the other piece that would be invaluable to us, of course, would be the results, and how soon we could get those results to then take action with them.
And that's something we're talking to our test vendors about, to see how quickly we can get information back. When it's multiple choice questions, selected response, that type of thing, that can get back very, very quickly. Currently, for example, with the writing prompts, it's, I want to say, is it 2 weeks max that our vendors have to get that back to schools. I could be mistaken on that. But I know it's no longer than that. But still, when you're trying to use assessment to drive instruction, you can't wait 2 weeks for material to come back. So this is where we're working with our vendors to see what's possible.
And Lisa, how different would these future interim texts we're talking about, one thing that administrators or districts still have access to are the MOLEAP assessments, right, within DRC. So would you envision that those would stay in place and this would just be an additional resource? Because
Yes.
that's invaluable. So districts who don't know about those and are using them, the windows right now as well, right, that they could be taking those to get some results and get some exposure for their kids.
Yeah, MOLE, those are great informational. And you mentioned available through DRC, and we also have those for English 1 and English 2 available, off the DESE website. And Questar helped us in developing those. So we have them for all grade levels that are assessed. And then question, are the MOLE blocks, they align with the priority standards? The MOLE blocks are aligned with the Missouri learning standards.
But they have gone through in most contents and pulled out to say, and here's the priority standards with each one
There's
that
been
are
time
covered.
to do that on some, not all.
On some, yes. But teachers could cross-reference.
Absolutely, right.
Many of them have the priority standards with it and them as well.
Right. And when we're talking about priority standards, please, in your districts, make sure that teachers understand the importance of using those other standards, because those supporting standards are oftentimes the scaffolding that is needed for students to be successful with those priority standards. Also, there are some standards that I think should have made the cut for priority standards, but didn't. For example, media literacy that students need in every aspect of their lives did not make the cut as a priority standard. That concerns me. So we just need to make clear to teachers that priority standards, they don't stand alone, and they are not going to ensure that our students are truly ready with all they need to be successful.
I love that you brought that up, because I always reiterate they're recommended. And so when I work with schools on my recommended list, you'll be proud of me. I have media literacy because I think that's so important just culturally as well, that students understand that. But another example is in kindergarten, beginning, middle, and end didn't make the cut. And I feel like that's a huge prerequisite
Yes.
to summarizing. And so districts still need to use agency and have their teachers look over those, that they're not an exhaustive list. Okay. Last question. I also have, because Natalie touched on this, many districts are using things like NWEA, iReady, things where they can get a benchmark. I have my own thoughts on that I'm going to push aside, but if these interims were from the state within the next 3 or 4 years, would you foresee, and Natalie was kind of hinting at this, that districts could let go maybe of some of these other things they're paying for and use these free interim, or these state provided interims, and in some ways I feel like they might even be more accurate, more accurate data to actually give teachers in districts, because they're truly aligned to the Missouri standards. These companies like iReady, et cetera, will say we're aligned, but I still find an ELA, again, math and science are different, but ELA, the content and interpretation of standards. So I don't know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the interims have the potential to provide what you need. Again, this is a district decision based on your students, based on what they're coming into your classrooms with. For example, here in Jefferson City, and that's the district I retired from, there was just a piece in the newspaper the other day about their ELA scores going up, and they were attributing that to the resource they have brought in. I won't name it publicly because I'm not here to sell a resource, but that they have brought in, and it was one of the ones you mentioned, Shauna, but that they believe it has made a real positive difference in their district, and it's working for them based on what the students are coming in with and what they need. What's working for Jeff City might not work for Blair Oaks district just down the road from us, or for Columbia Public, just north of us. So, but the MOLE blocks and the interims and these other things, these are all tools. There's not going to be a one size fits all, but these are all tools from which schools can select based on their needs. And any idea if the testing vendor will change for the redesign. No, I don't. We are required to look at contract renewals every so often with the vendors, and so I don't know. I don't know.
Well, Lisa, I really thank you for your time. And one of the things I'd like to close with, just talking about all assessment, and I love your point of what worked for one district may not work for others. I think so much of it is the processes that people put in place. Assessment itself doesn't do it, but it's when teachers have clarity and can have that, it's actionable data that they can use it and see how their kids scored and how they need to adjust instruction. And so I personally sometimes feel it's more difficult with things like iReady and NWEA when it's online and the teachers can't even see how kids did. So you could have that same resource in place. And if you have a process where you give teachers time to actually look at that and adjust their instruction based on what they're seeing, that can make all the difference. So sometimes we have all the right things in place. It's just switching our systems and processes to utilize it a bit better.
Right. I think something you pointed to here is the need for students to actually see this, or for teachers to actually see the students' work, not just a score, not just a data point, but to see the work itself. Because that's what truly makes the difference. You get your test results back, from the previous spring's test, and you see, what percentage of students did well on this standard and what percentage did on that standard, but you don't get to see the questions, and you don't get to see the incorrect answers that students are selecting. And so just those data points in and of themselves really don't provide teachers with the information they need to truly know how to inform instruction.
And, you mentioned just this anxiety that everybody has over testing. I think as district and building leaders, the more you can have these types of interim assessments where teachers can have access to analyze it, and we switch from assessment of learning, because that's where the fear comes in, and assessment for learning. And that would be the goal, in my opinion, of what you're trying to do, is because along the way, you're helping both teachers and students to really understand that. So I think that's exciting. And we'll definitely try to recruit people who'd want to be a part of just more ideas of how could redesign it. One last question, or maybe it was just a comment Natalie had mentioned. She asked.
Right.
Yeah, because they tend to partner with programs. So, but again, it was nice to meet you, Stuart. We're glad to have you on board, more support. And we just appreciate your time on the call today.
Okay, Shauna and Carrie and Natalie, if there's anything else comes up that you need, let us know.
Okay, and I will put a little debrief of what we talked about here on the network in your contact information in case you hear from somebody else, because others might have watched it.
Sounds good. Thanks,
All
Shauna.
right. Thank you.
Have a good
Bye.
weekend, everyone.